Okay, I hope everybody's seeing the hello.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, off we go. Lickety split. This is a contribution from David Pepper to get us off with a yuck.
Is it really her?
Trailer trash.
Oh, that's, yeah, photoshopped in.
AI. Yep.
Did you
That's
do it,
good.
David, or did you find it?
No, I found it.
Looks real to me.
And here's another one. The title is sad and useless, but yeah, I remember last week it happened in North Ireland, so who knows? Here's the real big news. Jim Tyson will appreciate this. This is March Madness is beginning as we speak. And you look at this and you get cross-eyed, but all the important teams are right there. So we zero down, and there's St. Mary's. They're playing Grand Canyon. So what? So what? Yes, Jim.
You're wrong again, John. The important part is the Midwest region where Oregon is playing.
Quack, quack.
And even worse, John, you put the men up and not the women.
Yeah. Boo. And then allow me to expand on my comments. So St. Mary's plays Grand Canyon, and look where they play them, Jim. They play them in Spokane. And I'm assuming that's on Gonzaga's court, which they've had great success with the last couple of years. So they could wind up beating Alabama, although Alabama's ranked higher. And then where would they play next? Los Angeles. So they've been very, very lucky with the draw. I'm just going to point out that 16 years ago, we saw this skinny sophomore. He lit up the tournament, surprised everybody, and the rest is history. St. Mary's has a sophomore from Lafayette. Jim, your hometown. I hope you're assuaged. And he had great success at Camp Olindo. Leading to state titles and things, and he's been playing very, very well. Okay, enough of that. I hinted that there were some diversion of the genders in opinion, and The Economist put together a really interesting article that looked at the political identification of men and women over time. And you can see that there is a definite divergence, and the men are becoming more conservative, and the women are becoming more liberal. So we have some women here that I'm counting on them to fill in the blanks. And it seems that it's more young men who are becoming more conservative, which goes against conventional wisdom. And the question is, are they more threatened by unemployment or more realistically underemployment? As women work more and take higher and higher positions, is there some resentment? And does that account for the age differential, since older men already have job security. Thoughts?
Well, you got that scale on the right, John, is a little skewed. The men go from what, 4.73 to 4.9. It's not a huge change.
There's other data that
Okay, the females are more
yeah,
impressive.
that backs that up, and it's not just America. It's females are outperforming males, and both are becoming more educated, but women at a slightly faster rate, and not just here, but all around the world. And they go into depth. I don't want to go into depth, but there was just a couple of graphics that I just had to put up of extreme expressions of resentment against what's going on. The resentment in Europe is among the men. Feminism has gone too far, and notably in Europe, the populist parties are taking off. Somebody was saying something. And then in China, the resentment is how slow things are. Asian women are beginning to speak up more because they're lagging behind. So the gender relationship to politics is getting complicated. And then here you look at the difference within countries. So men are light blue, women are darker blue, and you see that the Australia, they're both more on the conservative side. But everywhere else, there's a separation with the women become being more liberal than the men, all the way down. But the biggest difference, the delta, is the United States. And you almost wonder whether a lot of these men are part of Trump's base, right? The polling verifies that. So I just found all this very interesting. Richard Reeves, there's two Richard Reeves. This is the British Richard Reeve. A comment? And he addresses why in America is it the whitest. And he has some suggestions, having written this book on the crisis of modern masculinity. He thinks that boys should start in school a year earlier. That's his final conclusion. And especially in America, there should be more men teaching. And he thinks there should be vocational training targeted at men, particularly in other fields as well, like healthcare. So I just couldn't ignore this, because it seems like it's a global trend, and it seems like it's having impact in politics. Comments? Okay, on to Ukraine. If you watched the Academy Awards, you saw that the documentary over Maripol got an award. Yeah, Jim.
Before you move on, I thought I'd address your assumption. The St. Mary's game is being played at Spokane Veterans Memorial Arena.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure about that. I wonder if does it seat more than the.
I didn't go that far, but I did want to address your assumption.
Thank you. So the big thing I think is Macron really stepping out to lead Europe. He's called the fight with Russia existential, and has even talked about Western troops going into Ukraine. He was kind of a reluctant warrior to start with, but now he is out front leading the parade, and because he knows that if Putin wins, everybody's lives would change, not just the French, and we've talked about that in detail. The Economist had this really good article about the domestic spirit of the times, and Russia being rogue. Putin's just rogue. He's a spoiler. He's really a colony of China now, supplying particularly energy and petro products to China. And is that really what the Russians want? Do they want to give up their attachments to the West that were really started with Peter the Great? In any case, the Economist, in its conclusions, and that's all I'm going to give its conclusions, that we should always keep in mind the 143 ordinary Russians are not. We can't assume that they're waving the flag for this, and that in the long run, and I think this is another point that Timothy Snyder makes. Russia will only stop if its people want it to stop. And the sanctions don't seem to be working as well as we hoped. We've covered this before, that now a lot of the world is congratulating Putin on his victory. Can you imagine in the shadow of the murder of Navalny, sending Putin a congratulations message? But Modi did in India. That's how bad things are. But the Economist worried about what they called the temptation to do secondary sanctions, that we should sanction India because they haven't sanctioned Putin. And they said that would backfire, that the sanctions have to remain targeted and modest and give them time to work. Yes, Bob.
I heard a comment recently. Oh, I think it was on Fareed Zakaria's show. Basically, the question was, when have sanctions ever worked and where? Because if you look at North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, and now Russia, are sanctions actually working?
Well, I'd say South Africa, they worked.
Yes, there were the substantial international corporations who were sort of dominated that, I guess. Anyway, discussion another time.
Well, but the international corporations have all pulled out of Russia. So
Yes, but not, first of all, not all of them have. Secondly, the assets of those corporations have been taken over by local well, I don't know if they're oligarchs or not. So, for example, you can still go out and have a very relaxing cup of coffee. It's not at Starbucks, it's at Star Cafe.
yeah, and the other thing, the goods are still flowing, but through intermediaries in like Kazakhstan.
Yeah, Kazakhstan's imports from Germany, I almost said West Germany, Germany are up 2,000%. Well, they must have an awful lot of good salespeople rushing around Kazakhstan because, or rather, you'll find all those imports on the streets of Moscow.
Yeah. They're not working. You're right. Yeah, Jim.
Well,
Jim, is your hand up? No. Okay. It seems like Macron and now Germany are cranking up their militaries to get to at least the 3% target. It took a long time, and Trump was right to criticize Angela Merkel on this score. But it looks like Europe is on the move, and it might be to Trump, threatening isolationist America. So who knows? Silver lining. But certainly Finland and Sweden joining NATO, I keep mentioning that. Czechoslovakia has ramped up. They were famous for almost 100 years, their arms industry, and they're in high gear now. So we shall see. We shall see. But the Economist just reminds us all that it's really our universal liberal values that are the strongest thing we have going for us. It takes a while, but just to keep doing what we're doing and what the Telegraph is doing every weekday with Ukraine up to date. And also just reminding us the point that we dove down too deeply is our economies are 4 times stronger than the oligarchs. We've just got to ramp them up. Putin has certainly been able to do that, so that his country's on a war footing. For him, it is existential, because if they lose, he's dead. Doing what we're doing, we're supporting dissidents and making exceptions for some medications, humanitarian exceptions. I'm going backwards there. But here's the latest example of supporting the dissidents within Russia. This is a Telegraph headline that they managed to humiliate and outfox Putin in the media front by everybody turning up at polling stations at noon, as he had originally recommended, and as his wife has taken over. So thousands of people just turned up and overwhelmed polling stations. Everybody knew they were demonstrating, but what could the Russian government do? Arrest somebody for showing up at a polling station to vote? And Ms. Navalny stayed in Berlin, but she went to the Russian embassy to vote at noontime, as she organized Noon Against Putin. I don't know how you translate that into Russian, but it must have a good ring. Okay, so good news. The Economist featured America's pumped up economy against all expectations. We're continuing to do well, and that's our strength. And just to remind people, when Reagan defeated communism, it was really by outspending them on the military front. Yes, Bob.
I wanted to add on the previous subject of NATO expenditure by the members of NATO that on the NATO website, it claims that it was already in 2014, before Trump argued for it, that the NATO heads of state and government agreed to commit 2% of their national gross domestic product to defense spending to help ensure the alliance's continued military readiness. That was on the time, that was in response to the illegal annexation of Crimea, as NATO puts it. So it was before Trump, the commitment was made.
Okay.
Biden should note that.
Okay, good. Other good news, the Dispatch, my favorite conservative rag, they continue to find silver linings, and this again in our technological frontier, and they're documenting it in more detail with a new newsletter. And the other good news, I think, is if our Congress doesn't do much and we're hamstrung, we've talked about Ramsey's hope for the future, which is organizations of nations banding together, much like the EU, which has been one of the great accomplishments in political development. And they, just to be specific, they have 6 members of the European Commission that are able to make decisions that Americans have to.
John is here if you care about where we're putting stuff.
I'm hearing.
Well, the only one
I'm hearing.
I'm concerned about is the yelling.
Jim, I think it's John.
John, you need to mute.
The Americans have to fall in with what the EU commissioners do. So because they control such a huge part of all markets. And so they fined Apple $2 billion for unfair policies on their music streaming app. And this is under their Digital Service Act. And they've also made it safe for digital users in the area of privacy. And they've made it safe for newcomers trying to break into the market against all these big guys here that I've listed. And quite often they do that in partnership with California. California leapfrogs over our own Washington, D.C. federal government, and often partners with the EU in putting up progressive policies, namely in automobile exhaust, mileage requirements. California has led the way, and the EU has been one of their cheerleaders. And then they managed to get something done on artificial intelligence last week. And they're specifically banning facial recognition use of artificial intelligence. So that is a bit of good news. Any comments before I go on to a great new book? This is the latest in a series of a different way to look at world history, reframing what we've been taught. And here the subtitle is The History of the West is Not Quite What You Learned in School. And the West has not made the world made the West. And she looks specifically at the concept of civilizations. And that's how Aiko will remember how I got started with this weekly conference in the time of COVID. We had an in-law who said, Professor John, can you explain to me what a civilization is? And I made the mistake that Josephine Quinn chides us for. What her point is, you really shouldn't compartmentalize history and boil it down into simple categories that it really distorts the flow of history. And it's not peoples in lump categories that make history, but singular people and the connections they create. And the more we talk about it, the more interesting it is to talk about connections. For example, Truman connection with his boyhood chum, Eddie Jacobson, and the role that played. That was important in the founding of Israel. So I've just kind of tumbled into that belief myself. The Economist says her approach is simple, persuasive, and deserving of attention. Interestingly, at the beginning, they quote Mahatma Gandhi. When asked what he thought about Western civilization, he quipped, "It would be a good idea," meaning he didn't think the British were behaving all that civilized in India. Okay. And then she points out that civilization itself, if you look at the history, the word really wasn't used until early in Enlightenment, when we had the tendency to start categorizing things into building blocks. And for sure, the idea that Greece is the bottom of the earliest foundational building block is wrong. That you can look at other civilizations before the Greeks, and specifically Josephine Quinn picks out the Persians. I hesitate because I just got a message that my internet is unstable. So I'm speaking from this hilltop villa out on the Big Island, and if I go out, I'm sorry, but we'll see. You've been warned. I hope it regains its stability. Can everybody hear me? Are you still?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, we all learned about the civilization maybe began at Marathon when the Greeks defeated the Persians, but that's not the way she sees it. And she certainly doesn't agree with this concept of the clash of civilizations made famous by Samuel Huntington. He was thinking mostly of the clash between Islamic civilizations. But she disagrees with that formulation that civilizations are always hostile to each other, and that may be a part of the problem, a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is a couple of words you don't usually hear in the same sentence: a scholarly romp. I like that very much. And rather than neighboring civilizations being hostile to each other, if you look closely throughout history, neighboring civilizations have been open and receptive to ideas and fashions and technologies. And I'd say that's one thing that struck me as I've been looking at history these last few years, is how eager trade was, how eager Homo sapiens were to trade items. If they have too many apples, they'd like to trade some for oranges. It's just a trade seems to have a logic of its own and be a very important generator in a progress. And Greece wasn't the birth of civilizations. It's quite often the transmission of it. They're a big part of transmitting one civilization to the next. And that democracy came relatively late to Greece. I'll have to read what she says about Libya. I've never heard that, but I have heard a lot about the Persians. And she maintains that the Persians actually imposed some democracy on some Greek city-states, and that they had a lot of, the Persians had a lot of popular support. And then here are the other books that Ramsey has introduced to us that reframe the study of history. Harari and his Sapiens, and of course, more recently, Frankopan's the Silk Roads. And this was a map that I couldn't resist. I put it in for David Pepper. Just religions and the flow of religions before Islam. And of course, you see the West was just arrow coming up from Rome, basically. Now for something completely different, but Persia is going to enter into it. That's my buried segue, but believe me, Persia is going to be mentioned in just a few minutes. Any comments before I go into a little bit more depth about ranking the greatness of U.S. Presidents. Okay, off we go. I showed this previously. The lower you are on this line, the better you are, because that means the closer you are to 100. And Lincoln is always the winner, but you can see Truman here and Obama. I know this is hard to see, so I'll show the close up of the big ones. The recency bias for sure, because after Truman you have Obama, Ike, and LBJ, and they're all pretty recent. But this is the more readable table, and I've shown it before. I'll just pause a second and let you look at it again. I'll invite any comments before I zero down on Truman specifically. No comments.
Who was asked to rate these presidents?
So this outfit, the Brandon Rottinghouse, it's done periodically by different people doing the survey of different academics. Ramsey says, Michael, that there's a great Wikipedia website on this. So if you want to take a deeper dive and go into the history of this and how various presidents have risen and fallen in this, it has to be an arbitrary exercise, obviously, but it's all documented pretty well on Wikipedia. So have a look. But Ramsey has a critique specifically of this one, which I've hinted at before. So 19 through 26, and then here's the bottom, appropriately ending with Trump, and we've looked at it before, so I won't dally. But this is a book that really influenced me, the biography of Truman, which I thought was very well written, and I admit I fell in love with the guy, not for any intellectual reason. I was quite young, and the reason I took to him is coming up. Sure. He took over a nation that had been isolated, but had been pulled out of isolation by Pearl Harbor, and he presided over the dropping of the atom bomb, but then he put the world back together, with at least Europe, with the Marshall Plan. And McCall would say he stood as a bulwark against the Soviets. Ramsey has a different perspective on that, and that he sponsored Israel in part because there was a similar Genesis story. But I didn't have any of those reasons. I liked him because he wore glasses, and I was bullied as a kid as being four eyes. So I remember the election of 1948. I'm in Indianapolis, which is a very Republican town, and they were all for Dewey. And for a very personal reason I was for Truman. And I think I showed this slide last time, but I want to be sure I bend over backwards to give Ramsey's point of view very briefly. That Truman launched the Cold War, and this Offner's opinion that unsupported by evidence by the CIA, he embraced Churchill, and that Churchill was in it just because he wanted to keep fighting and be relevant. And even George Kennan later denounced Truman. He was the State Department official who argued for containment, which was really the ideology of the Cold War. And I asked Chat GPT. Went to artificial intelligence again, and I said, "Who's to blame for starting the Cold War?" And Chat GPT, in its wisdom, says that blaming one side is not the way to go. That there were several complexities, and he lists all of them. I'm not going to go into the detail of Ramsey's belief, and I'll just stop Ramsey's point of view there. I'm sorry he's not here today to expand more, and I'm probably leaving something out. But this came up. You'll remember, because we talked about Truman's position on whether Israel should become a nation. And as we look at that now, that's an increasingly complicated topic. But when we look at the beginning, it was pretty much like Josephine Quinn said, it was connections between individuals, and it was his connection, as I said earlier, with Eddie Jacobson that defined his approach. But there's also the larger argument about the spirituality of America, how religious our spirit is. It may be true now that there are few people are less and less influenced by religion, but compared to other nations, we continue to be the most involved in religion. And there's an identification, certainly even now, with the evangelicals and the Bible. And there is a big support for the state of Israel based on Christian Zionism, not in addition to Jewish Zionism. And of course, it can be critiqued, including by Jews. But a lot of it centers around the apocalypse and the second coming, and that if Jews are in Israel, it's going to make everything simpler. This is where I come back to Cyrus. The story of Cyrus kind of presages all the Gentiles who are also Zionists. In this country, I mentioned particularly among the founding fathers, it was kind of a homecoming, a second coming for them, the Pilgrims, for instance, to escape to America with, they identified as the Jews, possibly returning to Israel. And the second Great Awakening, part of that, well, and I've mentioned this before, this was outlined in this book that Aiko's reading now, about how American missionaries started going to the Middle East in the 1820s. And unfortunately, in the 1820s, it wasn't safe in terms of disease, and many of them died of the diseases that Westerners were unprepared for. But the missionaries, as I mentioned in a previous session, were involved in treating the Saudi tribe, and which gave them an in with the new state of Saudi Arabia, and the hospitals and public health programs, which are outlined in this book, give the full details of that. But where it all started, the missionary movement, is marked in Williamstown, Massachusetts, visible to this day. By the way, one of the missionaries was a predecessor of John Steinbeck. So Truman, in his own words, said, I am a Baptist, and it's because I think that sect gives the common man the shortest, most direct approach to God. And that in all its complexity is part of the religious component of this country and the role that it's played in the world. It's obviously going to be very different in the future, but I think it's interesting, and it's one of the particularities of individuals connecting with other individuals that Josephine Quinn talks about in her new book. I mentioned Truman because he came up, and I have a captive audience of a few Japanese Americans here that can identify with the 442nd. And this show ended with Truman citing the 442nd, the year after the war. He said, not only you fought not only the enemy, but you fought prejudice, and you've won. And this clip was shown at the end of the movie that we saw in the 442nd. And so this is the history that many of us have read, Facing the Mountain, about the 442nd. This is the same guy who wrote the Boys in the Boat, another good book. DVC graduate, by the way. But that wasn't the first time that Truman was open to minorities. When he opened his seat for the Senate in 1940, he gave a famous speech, which was a brave thing to do in Missouri, since it was a had been a slave state and had a pretty strong United Daughters of the Confederacy. But he operated his campaign on a shoestring, sleeping in his car, and talking to whoever would listen. In 1940, as a congressman, his own grandparents had owned slaves. Nevertheless, he believed in the brotherhood of all. And he was quoted as being in favor of giving Negroes the rights which were theirs, that he saw denied to them when he fought as a lieutenant in World War I and saw his fellow commanding officers abusing African American soldiers. Again, one of those connections that makes history. And so in this speech, he says, look, if you can push anybody down, you just too could be pushed down. And he decried in particularly lynching and mob violence and lack of schools, which if you think in 1940, 90 years ago, was terrible. And give him hell, Harry. He said, I never gave anybody hell. I just told them the truth and they thought it was hell. He was the first president to address the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People from the Lincoln Memorial in 1947. And it's one of the reasons why actually he'd been chosen to be vice president in 1944, because the big city bosses knew he had a strong connection to African American leaders. And in 1948, he desegregated the armed forces, something that should have been done a long time ago. But in our fine county of Contra Costa, there was an event that contributed to that, the Port Chicago disaster. Port Chicago is on the Carquinez Strait, just to the east of Martinez, where a lot of us worked many years. And it had been part of moving munitions to the Concord Weapons Station from ships. And the one ship blew up, and 320 sailors and civilians died, entering 390 more. And in the investigation, they found out that a disproportionate number of the dead were African Americans. They had been the ones that had been forced to do this or ordered to do this dangerous work. Obviously, there was a lot of resentment, and there was a mutiny about the unsafe conditions, the Port Chicago 50. And they were convicted in the post-explosion mutiny. They were finally released just out of common sense in January of 1946. And there was a cloud of, hey, this wasn't fair. And the Navy began making changes right away and on their own, desegregating its forces just for the sake of morale. But Truman made it official. And so let me just, in 1 minute, summarize Truman's role in the birth of Israel. In 1953, he was invited to give a speech, and he was introduced by his buddy Eddie Jacobson, who said he helped bring the state of Israel into existence. And Truman said, what do you mean, helped? I am Cyrus. he was given this scroll, and he said, I did not believe in sending the Jews to places like Brazil. I'd read my Bible. I knew it was the promised land, just like it was the pilgrims' promised land. And he quoted George Washington, who had written a famous letter to the Jews of Savannah. And everybody knows that Cyrus released the Jews who'd been captured in Babylonia to go back and build the second temple. And he was the only non-Jew that apparently is reflected in the official Jewish history. And I won't go through all of this, but it's in the book of Chronicles. And so this is from an article, an essay in commentary. If anybody wants the details of it, I can send it. But this was Benjamin Franklin's proposal for the first American seal, which was going to be the splitting of the Red Sea with the subtitle, Rebellion to Tyrants is Obedience to God. Okay, so I think we'll end with his quote. There's always been trouble there, meaning in the Holy Land. And the pity of it is the whole area is just waiting to be developed. And this is a pity today. So I think this is where I'll stop. Any comments?
John, just of relevance, this weekend is Purim, which is not a major Jewish holiday, but it does celebrate a historical event in Persia when the Jews were all going to be slaughtered, and the queen, who is Jewish, basically tells the king, like, this guy Haman is plotting to kill all the Jews, and instead of putting the Jews on the gallows, Haman goes to the gallows. So it's a festival of dance and party, which is a little paradoxical in what's going on in the Middle East right now, but just links the Jews with Persia. I thought that'd be interesting for people.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. Anything else? If not, I'll return with maybe more of a tan in a week.
All right, enjoy Hawaii.